6 months after Derek Hayes was sent to prison, Martha Williams was sitting on her memorial bench on a beautiful spring morning. The oak tree above her was full of green leaves, and her wind chimes were playing softly in the gentle breeze. The garden looked more beautiful than ever. Martha was not alone. Mrs. Chen was helping her plant new flowers along the walkway where Martha had fallen that terrible day. The concrete had been cleaned and painted with a small rainbow design that the neighborhood children had created. "Martha, these roses are going to be gorgeous," Mrs. Chen said. Patting soil around a new bush, Martha smiled. Robert always said that good things can grow from difficult ground. The memorial bench had become something special in the neighborhood. The Willowbrook HOA board had officially declared it a community landmark. A small brass plaque next to the bench read, "In memory of Robert Williams and in honor of courage in the face of injustice." Every day, neighbors stopped by to sit on the bench and chat with Martha. Children played nearby while their parents talked about community issues. The corner of Martha's yard had become an unofficial meeting place for the whole neighborhood. The HOA itself had completely changed. After Derek Hayes was arrested, the old board members resigned in embarrassment. New elections were held, and Martha was asked to serve as the president. She declined that position but agreed to chair the new oversight committee that reviewed all HOA enforcement actions. "We want to make sure that what happened to you never happens to anyone else," the new HOA president, Mr. Johnson, had told Martha. The new HOA rules were simple and fair. Instead of hiring outside enforcement companies, the association used volunteer committees to address problems. Instead of threatening fines, they offered to help homeowners fix violations. Instead of targeting certain families, they treated everyone with equal respect. Marcus had kept his promise to create lasting change. The law firm he had started, Williams & Associates, specialized in protecting homeowners from HOA abuse. His office was located downtown, but he still came to visit his mother every Wednesday evening. On this particular Wednesday, Marcus arrived with exciting news. "Mom, I got a call from the Department of Justice today," Marcus said, sitting down next to his mother on the memorial bench. Martha looked up from the book she was reading. "Good news, I hope." Marcus grinned. "The best news. They're using our case as a model to create new federal guidelines for HOA enforcement. They want me to help write the training materials." Martha hugged her son proudly. "That means our struggle is helping people we'll never even meet." Marcus nodded. "And there's more good news. Remember David Park, the man who called from the Oakwood community?" Martha remembered. Mr. Park had been one of the first people to contact Marcus after the news story aired. "He called to tell me that his HOA has implemented all the reforms we recommended. They fired neighborhood protection services and started managing enforcement themselves. He said there haven't been any complaints in 4 months." This kind of news was coming in regularly. Communities across the country were changing their enforcement policies because of Martha's case. Several other states had passed laws similar to the Martha Williams Protection Act, but the most satisfying news had come just last week. Neighborhood protection services had gone out of business. The company could not survive the lawsuits, the bad publicity, and the new regulations that Marcus had helped create. "Good riddance," Martha had said when Marcus told her. "Maybe now those men will have to find honest work." Derek Hayes was not eligible for parole for another 7 years. Marcus received regular updates from the Department of Corrections. Hayes had tried to appeal his conviction twice, but both appeals were rejected. He was also facing additional federal charges for civil rights violations in other communities. Martha rarely thought about Hayes anymore. She had forgiven him, not because he deserved it, but because carrying anger was too heavy for her heart. She preferred to focus on the positive changes that had come from their struggle. The neighborhood had become more united than ever. The monthly community meetings that Marcus had started were still being held. Neighbors looked out for each other and shared resources. When new families moved in, they were welcomed warmly and given copies of the real HOA rules along with phone numbers of neighbors they could call if they had questions. Martha had become something of a local celebrity. She was invited to speak at community events and HOA meetings across the region. She always gave the same message: stand up for what's right even when it's scary. And remember that you're never alone if you're part of a good community. The Williams family had also used their settlement money to create the Robert Williams Memorial Fund, which provided legal assistance to low-income residents facing HOA abuse. Marcus volunteered his time to the fund, and several other lawyers in the city had joined the effort. We want to make sure that everyone has access to justice, not just people who can afford expensive lawyers, Marcus explained at the fund's launch event. On this peaceful spring evening, Martha and Marcus sat together on the memorial bench as the sun began to set. The wind chimes played their gentle song, and neighbors waved as they walked their dogs or worked in their gardens. "Son, do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had just given in to Hayes that day?" Martha asked. Marcus considered the question. "I think Hayes would have kept bullying people until someone else stood up to him. But I'm glad it was you, Mom. You showed everyone what real courage looks like." Martha smiled. "I was terrified that day, but I kept thinking about your father and how disappointed he would be if I let someone destroy the bench he built with his own hands." Marcus looked at the sturdy wooden bench that his father had constructed so carefully. "Dad built this to last, didn't he?" Martha nodded. "Just like he built our family to last, and just like we built this community to last." As darkness fell, solar lights that the HOA had installed came on along the walkways. The neighborhood looked peaceful and welcoming. Children's laughter could be heard from the playground that had been built with some of the settlement money. Martha stood up from the bench and gathered her gardening tools. "I should go inside and start dinner." Marcus helped his mother carry her things. "Mom, I'm proud of what we accomplished together." Martha stopped and looked back at the memorial bench under the oak tree. "We didn't just get justice for ourselves, did we? We made things better for everyone." Marcus hugged his mother. "That's what Dad would have wanted." As they walked toward the house, Martha thought about how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been a quiet widow who just wanted to tend her garden in peace. Now she was an advocate for homeowners' rights and a symbol of resistance against bullying. But in many ways, her life was exactly the same. She still loved working in her garden. She still missed Robert every day. She still found comfort in the gentle music of her wind chimes. The difference was that she was no longer alone. She had discovered that she lived in a community full of good people who would stand up for each other when it mattered, and she had learned that sometimes the most ordinary people are called to do extraordinary things. Martha Williams had faced down a bully and won, but more importantly, she had helped create a world where other people would not have to face bullies alone. As she turned off the garden lights and went inside her house, Martha felt grateful for the difficult journey that had led to this peaceful ending. Sometimes the worst days of our lives teach us the most about who we really are. And sometimes when we stand up for what's right, we discover that we're stronger than we ever imagined. 2 weeks after Derek Hayes' arrest, Marcus received a call that made him smile. It was District Attorney Karen Morrison, who was prosecuting Hayes for assault and battery. "Mr. Williams, I wanted to give you an update. Hayes' lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but we rejected it. We're going to trial, and we expect to get a conviction on all charges." Marcus was sitting in his temporary office that he had set up in Martha's dining room. Papers and legal files covered the table as he worked on the civil rights case. "That's good news," Marcus replied. "What about the impersonating a police officer charge?" "That's going to trial too. And the FBI is ready with their federal charges. Hayes is looking at serious prison time." Meanwhile, the civil case against Neighborhood Protection Services was growing larger every day. Marcus had partnered with 3 other law firms to handle all the victims who were coming forward. They now had over 200 people from 12 different communities who had been harassed by fake enforcement officers. The media attention was intense. Marcus appeared on several television shows to discuss the case and the problem of HOA abuse. He always made sure to emphasize that his mother was the real hero of the story. Martha Williams could have just paid the fines and removed her husband's memorial bench, Marcus told a reporter from CNN. But she stood up for what was right even when it put her in danger. That's true courage. The HOA industry was scrambling to respond to the scandal. Several companies announced new background check requirements for enforcement officers. Some HOAs were firing their enforcement companies and going back to volunteer management. But Marcus wasn't satisfied with these voluntary changes. He was working with state legislators to pass new laws requiring licensing and training for all HOA enforcement officers. "We need to make sure this is never just someone's job to bully people," Marcus explained to a committee of state senators. "HOA enforcement should be about helping communities, not terrorizing residents." 3 weeks after Hayes' arrest, Martha was well enough to return to her normal activities. The cut on her head had healed, and the doctor said she had recovered completely from her concussion. Marcus found his mother in her garden one morning, tending to her flowers. The memorial bench was still there under the oak tree, and the wind chimes were making their gentle music in the breeze. "How are you feeling, Mom?" Marcus asked. Martha smiled at her son. "I feel stronger than I have in years. It's strange, getting hurt was terrible, but fighting back made me remember who I really am." Marcus hugged his mother. "You were always strong, Mom. Hayes just picked the wrong person to mess with." That afternoon, Marcus received another important phone call. It was from the president of Neighborhood Protection Services, a man named Richard Blake. "Mr. Williams, I'd like to discuss settling this lawsuit," Blake said in a nervous voice. Marcus had been expecting this call. "Mr. Blake, I'm listening. We're prepared to offer a substantial settlement to all the affected residents. We're also willing to implement new training programs and oversight procedures." Marcus walked over to his mother's kitchen window, where he could see the memorial bench in the garden. "Mr. Blake, let me be clear about something. This lawsuit isn't just about money. It's about making sure this never happens again." Blake's voice became more desperate. "We understand that. We're committed to reform." Marcus had done his research on Neighborhood Protection Services. The company had been cutting corners and hiring unqualified people for years to increase their profits. "Mr. Blake, I've looked at your company's hiring practices. You've been putting dangerous people in positions of authority because they were cheap to hire." "That's not entirely accurate," Blake tried to argue. Marcus interrupted him. "Derek Hayes was rejected by 2 police departments and fired from his last job for excessive force. You hired him anyway and sent him out to terrorize innocent families. You're as responsible for what happened to my mother as Hayes is." The settlement negotiations continued for several days. Marcus demanded not only compensation for the victims, but also major changes to how the company operated. He wanted independent oversight, proper training programs, and regular monitoring of enforcement officers. On a Friday morning, Marcus received the news he had been waiting for. District Attorney Morrison called to tell him that Derek Hayes had been found guilty on all charges. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, Morrison told Marcus. The video evidence was overwhelming. Hayes is going to prison for at least 3 years. Marcus immediately called his mother with the news. Martha was at the community center, where she had been volunteering with the Neighborhood Watch program that grew out of their organizing efforts. "Mom, Hayes was found guilty. He's going to prison." Martha was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad," she finally said. "Not because I want revenge, but because this means he can't hurt anyone else." The federal charges against Hayes came a week later. FBI agent Chen called Marcus to tell him that Hayes had also been indicted for violating civil rights under color of authority. "He faces an additional 5 to 10 years in federal prison," Agent Chen explained, "and we're also charging Neighborhood Protection Services with conspiracy to violate civil rights." But the biggest victory came 2 months later, when the state legislature passed the Martha Williams Protection Act. The new law required all HOA enforcement officers to be licensed, trained, and bonded. It also created a state oversight board to investigate complaints of abuse. Governor Patricia Hayes, no relation to Derek Hayes, invited Martha to the bill signing ceremony. Martha wore her best dress and sat in the front row as the governor signed the law that bore her name. "Mrs. Williams, your courage in standing up to a bully has protected thousands of families across our state," the governor said. "Thank you for your service to your community." Marcus stood behind his mother's chair, beaming with pride. Several of their neighbors from Willowbrook had come to the ceremony, including Mrs. Chen, the Johnsons, and the Martinez family. After the ceremony, a reporter asked Martha how it felt to have a law named after her. Martha thought for a moment before answering. "I never wanted to be famous. I just wanted to sit on my husband's bench and listen to my wind chimes. But sometimes life asks you to do more than you planned. I'm proud that our struggle helped other people." The civil lawsuit was settled 3 weeks later. Neighborhood Protection Services agreed to pay $12 million to the victims and to implement sweeping reforms. The company also agreed to hire Marcus's law firm to monitor their compliance for the next 5 years. Hayes appealed his conviction, but the appeal was rejected. He began serving his sentence at the state prison, where he would spend the next 8 years. On the day the settlement was announced, Marcus and Martha sat together on Robert's memorial bench under the oak tree. The wind chimes played their gentle song, and the garden was full of flowers. Do you think Dad would be proud of us? Martha asked. Marcus put his arm around his mother's shoulders. Mom, I think Dad would be amazed. You took on a bully and won. You protected not just yourself but hundreds of other families. Martha smiled and looked around at her peaceful garden. I couldn't have done it without you, son. Marcus squeezed his mother's hand. We make a good team. As the sun set over Willowbrook, Martha felt truly safe in her home for the first time in months. The neighborhood was stronger and more united than ever. And somewhere in a prison cell, Derek Hayes was learning that there are consequences for people who abuse their power. Justice had been served. Derek Hayes was arrested at his apartment that evening on charges of assault, battery, and impersonating a police officer. The arrest made the local news, and by the next morning Marcus's phone was ringing constantly. Mr. Williams, this is Janet Rodriguez from Channel 7 News. We heard about your mother's case. Would you be willing to do an interview? Marcus was sitting in Martha's kitchen, helping her with breakfast. Her head was still bandaged, but she was feeling much better. Mom, the local news wants to talk about what happened to you, Marcus told her. Martha looked worried. I don't want to be on television, son. I just want this to be over. Marcus understood his mother's feelings, but he knew that publicity would help prevent Hayes from hurting anyone else. Mom, if we tell your story, it might help other people who are being bullied by people like Hayes. After thinking about it, Martha agreed to a short interview. The news story aired that evening and showed the video of Hayes pushing Martha to the ground. The reporter also explained that Hayes had been impersonating a police officer and targeting minority families. The story had an immediate effect. Marcus's phone started ringing with calls from other people who had been harassed by Hayes in different neighborhoods. Mr. Williams, my name is David Park. I live in the Oakwood community about 10 miles from your mother's neighborhood. Derek Hayes worked there before he came to Willowbrook. Marcus grabbed a pen and paper. What happened in your neighborhood? Mr. Park explained that Hayes had worked for the Oakwood HOA for 6 months before being transferred to Willowbrook. He focused on Asian and Hispanic families mostly. He would find tiny violations and threaten huge fines. My neighbor, Mrs. Kim, had to remove a small Buddha statue from her garden because Hayes said it was a religious violation. Marcus wrote down all the details. Did anyone file complaints against Hayes? Several people complained to the HOA board, but nothing happened. Hayes told everyone he was a police officer and that questioning him could result in arrest. Over the next 3 days, Marcus received similar calls from residents of 4 different communities where Hayes had worked. The pattern was always the same. Hayes would target minority families with aggressive enforcement while ignoring similar violations by white families. Marcus compiled all of this information into a detailed report. He also discovered something that made him very angry. Hayes had been hired by a company called Neighborhood Protection Services that contracted with HOAs across the region. This company had been hiring people with criminal backgrounds and sending them out as fake law enforcement officers. On Friday morning, Marcus met with FBI Special Agent Lisa Chen, no relation to his mother's neighbor, Mrs. Chen. Agent Chen worked on civil rights violations and had read about the case in the news. Mr. Williams, your mother's case might be part of something much bigger, Agent Chen explained. We've been getting reports about fake police officers working for HOAs in several states. Marcus showed Agent Chen all the evidence he had gathered. It looks like Neighborhood Protection Services is running a scam. They hire people who can't become real police officers, and then send them out to intimidate residents. Agent Chen studied Marcus's files carefully. This is excellent investigative work. Have you considered joining the FBI? Marcus smiled. Thank you, but I like being a lawyer. I can help more people this way, Agent Chen agreed. To open a federal investigation into Neighborhood Protection Services and Derek Hayes. This meant that Hayes could face federal charges in addition to the state charges he was already facing. Meanwhile, Martha was becoming something of a celebrity in Willowbrook. Neighbors who had never spoken to her before were stopping by to check on her and to share their own stories about Hayes. Mrs. Martinez brought homemade soup and told Martha, I was so scared of that man. He made me feel like a criminal in my own home. Mr. Johnson visited with his children who made get-well cards for Martha. My kids were afraid to play outside when Hayes was around, he said. He would yell at them for riding their bikes on the sidewalk. But the most meaningful visit came from Mrs. Washington, the mother from the other black family in the neighborhood, Martha. I want to apologize, Mrs. Washington said, sitting in Martha's living room. Martha looked confused. Apologize for what? Mrs. Washington looked down at her hands. When Hayes was bothering our family, I was too scared to say anything. I was afraid that if I complained, he would make things worse for us. I should have stood up to him like you did. Martha reached over and took Mrs. Washington's hand. You don't need to apologize for being scared. Hayes was a frightening man. Mrs. Washington looked up with tears in her eyes. But if we had all stood together from the beginning, maybe he never would have hurt you. Marcus, who was listening from the kitchen, came into the living room. Mrs. Washington, that's exactly why I'm not just going after Hayes. I'm going after the whole system that allowed him to terrorize people. Marcus had been working with other lawyers to file a class action lawsuit against Neighborhood Protection Services and all the HOAs that had hired them. The lawsuit would demand compensation for everyone who had been harassed or threatened by fake enforcement officers. We're going to make sure this never happens again, Marcus promised. That weekend, Marcus organized a neighborhood meeting in the community center. More than 60 residents attended, including people from other neighborhoods where Hayes had worked. Marcus stood at the front of the room and addressed the crowd. We're here because one man thought he could use fear and intimidation to control how we live in our own homes. The crowd murmured in agreement. Hayes targeted people he thought wouldn't fight back. He picked on elderly residents, minorities, and immigrants. He thought we would be too scared or too isolated to stand up to him. A man in the back of the room raised his hand. What can we do to make sure this doesn't happen again? Marcus smiled. That's exactly the right question. First, we demand that all HOAs do proper background checks before hiring anyone. Second, we make sure everyone knows their rights when dealing with HOA enforcement. Third, we create a network so that if someone is being harassed, they don't have to face it alone. Mrs. Chen stood up. I want to help with that network. If I had known that Hayes was bothering other families, I would have spoken up sooner. Other residents began volunteering to help. Mr. Johnson offered to create a phone tree so neighbors could quickly alert each other about problems. Mrs. Martinez, who was a teacher, offered to help translate documents into Spanish for Hispanic families. Marcus looked around the room at all the people who were ready to help each other. This was what Hayes had never understood. When you attack one person in a strong community, you attack everyone. There's one more thing, Marcus announced. The FBI is now investigating Neighborhood Protection Services and Derek Hayes. This case is going to help protect people in communities all over the country. The crowd erupted in applause. Martha, who was sitting in the front row with her bandaged head, stood up and waved. She had become a symbol of resistance against bullying and discrimination. As people were leaving the meeting, many stopped to thank Marcus personally. Your mother is lucky to have a son like you, one elderly man said. Marcus looked over at his mother, who was talking with a group of neighbors. Actually, I'm lucky to have a mother like her. She taught me to never back down from a bully. The investigation was far from over, but Marcus knew they had already won the most important victory. The community was no longer afraid. At the hospital, doctors confirmed that Martha had a mild concussion and needed several stitches to close the cut on her head. Marcus sat with his mother while she rested, but his mind was working on the legal case he was already building. Marcus, you don't need to make a big fuss about this, Martha said weakly from her hospital bed. Maybe I can just remove the bench and wind chimes and this will all go away. Marcus took his mother's hand gently. Mom, this is not about your bench and wind chimes. This man assaulted you. He used his fake authority to intimidate you and then hurt you when you stood up for yourself. Martha sighed. I just want peace, son. I don't want trouble in the neighborhood. Marcus looked at his mother with love and determination. Mom, you've never caused trouble for anyone in your life. But Hayes is going to keep bullying people unless someone stops him, and I'm going to stop him. The next morning, Marcus drove back to Willowbrook to begin his investigation. He had taken a leave from his regular law practice to focus on this case completely. His military police training had taught him how to gather evidence, and his legal education had taught him how to use it. Marcus first went to Mrs. Chen's house. She welcomed him in and made tea while they talked. Mrs. Chen, I want to thank you for helping my mother yesterday and for recording what happened. Mrs. Chen nodded. Martha is a good neighbor. What that man did to her was terrible. Marcus took out a legal pad and pen. Can you tell me if Hayes has bothered other people in the neighborhood? Mrs. Chen's face became worried. Yes, he has. He came to our house 2 weeks ago. He said our garden decorations were not approved. We have some small statues that my mother brought from China. They've been there for 5 years, but Hayes said they had to go. Marcus wrote this down. Did he threaten you? Mrs. Chen nodded. He said we would be fined if we didn't remove them. My husband was so upset that he took them down the same day. Marcus spent the rest of the morning talking to other neighbors. At the Martinez house, he learned that Hayes had demanded they repaint their red front door. At the Johnson house, Hayes had complained about their children's bicycle being left in the driveway. But the most troubling story came from the Washington family, the other black family in the neighborhood. Mr. Washington told Marcus that Hayes had visited them 3 times in 2 weeks. He said our mailbox was the wrong color, Mr. Washington explained. Then he said our car was parked wrong in our own driveway. Then he said our dog was barking too much, but we don't even have a dog. Marcus wrote everything down carefully. A pattern was becoming clear. Hayes was targeting minority families with ridiculous complaints while leaving white families alone. That afternoon, Marcus went to the HOA office in the strip mall outside the neighborhood. He found a small office with 1 secretary and a part-time manager. I'd like to speak to someone about your enforcement officer. Derek Hayes, Marcus told the secretary. The secretary, a middle-aged woman named Carol, looked nervous. Are you having problems with Mr. Hayes? Marcus identified himself as Martha Williams's son and attorney. My mother was injured during an encounter with Hayes yesterday. I'm investigating his authority and training. Carol called the HOA manager, Mr. Brennan, who came out to meet with Marcus. Brennan was a thin man in his 60s who seemed very uncomfortable. Mr. Williams, I heard about the incident with your mother. I want you to know that the HOA does not approve of violence. Marcus sat down across from Brennan's desk. Then why did you hire someone who uses violence? Brennan shuffled some papers nervously. Mr. Hayes came highly recommended. He said he had law enforcement experience. Marcus leaned forward. What kind of background check did you do on Hayes? Brennan looked even more uncomfortable. Well, we checked his references. Did you verify his law enforcement claims? Did you check for complaints or criminal history? Brennan was quiet for a moment. We may not have been as thorough as we should have been. Marcus took out his phone and showed Brennan the video of Hayes attacking Martha. Brennan watched it with horror. Mr. Brennan, this man has been going around the neighborhood intimidating residents, especially minority families. He's been claiming police authority that he doesn't have, and now he's physically assaulted a 65-year-old woman. Brennan put his head in his hands. What do you want us to do? Marcus had been preparing for this question. First, fire Hayes immediately. Second, send a letter to all residents explaining that Hayes exceeded his authority. Third, review all of his enforcement actions and reverse any fines or penalties he imposed. Brennan nodded quickly. We can do that. We don't want any legal trouble. Marcus smiled coldly. Mr. Brennan, you already have legal trouble. The question is how much worse you want to make it. That evening, Marcus went back to the police station to meet with Sergeant Thompson. They sat in Thompson's office and reviewed all the evidence Marcus had gathered. This is impressive work, Thompson said, looking through Marcus's notes and witness statements. You've built a strong case for harassment and assault. Marcus nodded. But there's more. I did some research on Hayes's background. Marcus handed Thompson a folder. Derek Hayes was fired from his last job as a security guard for using excessive force. Before that, he was rejected by 2 police departments during the application process. He has a history of complaints about aggressive behavior. Thompson read through the documents with growing anger. And the HOA hired him without checking any of this? It gets worse, Marcus continued. I found out that Hayes has been telling residents he's a sworn law enforcement officer. He's been carrying handcuffs and claiming arrest powers. That's impersonating a police officer. Thompson stood up and walked to his window. Mr. Williams, we're going to arrest Hayes tonight. This has gone far enough. Marcus felt satisfied but not finished. Sergeant, there's something else you should know about me. Thompson turned around. What's that? Marcus handed Thompson another folder. I'm not just a civil rights lawyer. I'm a veteran. I served 3 tours in Afghanistan as a military police officer. I investigated crimes and interviewed suspects for 3 years. Thompson opened the folder and saw Marcus's military records, including several commendations for his investigative work. I know how bullies like Hayes think, Marcus continued. They pick on people they think can't fight back. Hayes saw my mother as an easy target. an older black woman living alone. He thought he could intimidate her and no one would care. Thompson nodded grimly, but he was wrong. Marcus stood up and extended his hand to Thompson. He was very wrong. My mother raised me to protect people who can't protect themselves, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. As Marcus drove home that night, he felt proud of the progress he had made in just one day. But he knew this was only the beginning. Hayes would be arrested, but Marcus wanted to make sure this never happened to anyone else. He was going to use every skill he had, learned in the military and in law, school, to get justice for his mother and for all the neighbors Hayes had bullied. Hayes had made the biggest mistake of his life when he put his hands on Martha Williams. He was about to learn that some families fight back. The ambulance arrived first, followed by 2 police cars. Martha was still lying on the concrete walkway, with Mrs. Chen holding a clean towel against the cut on her head. The paramedics quickly took over, checking Martha's blood pressure and heart rate. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name?" asked the female paramedic. "Martha Williams," Martha answered weakly. Her head still hurt terribly, but she was feeling less dizzy. Officer Hayes stood nearby, talking loudly to the police officers who had arrived. "I'm Derek Hayes, HOA enforcement officer for this community. This woman was violating association rules and refused to cooperate with my investigation." One of the police officers, a tall black man with graying hair, looked at Hayes with doubt. "And that led to her being injured, how exactly?" Hayes shifted nervously. "She was trying to run away from me. She fell down on her own." Mrs. Chen stood up and walked over to the police officer. "That is not what happened. I saw everything and I recorded it on my phone." The police officer turned to Mrs. Chen. "May I see that recording, ma'am?" Just as Mrs. Chen was getting her phone ready, a dark blue car pulled into Martha's driveway. A tall man in his early 30s got out of the car quickly. He was well-built and had short hair. He wore jeans and a button-down shirt, and he moved with confidence and purpose. "Mom," the man called out, running toward the group around Martha. "Mom, what happened?" This was Marcus Williams, Martha's son. He worked as a lawyer in the city and visited his mother every Wednesday evening. Today he had come a few hours early to surprise her with dinner. Marcus knelt down beside his mother where the paramedics were treating her. "Mom, are you okay? What happened to your head?" Martha tried to smile at her son, but the pain made it difficult. "Marcus, I'm so glad you're here. There was a problem with the HOA officer." Marcus looked at his mother's bloody head and then at the crowd of neighbors and police officers. His military training kicked in immediately. He had served 3 tours in Afghanistan as a military police officer before going to law school. He knew how to read a situation quickly. "Mom, don't try to talk right now," Marcus said gently. "Let the paramedics take care of you." Marcus stood up and walked over to the police officer who was talking to Mrs. Chen. "Excuse me, officer. I'm Marcus Williams, Martha's son. Can you tell me what happened here?" The police officer, whose name tag read Sergeant Thompson, looked at Marcus with respect. Something about the younger man's bearing and the way he spoke made it clear he was not someone to dismiss. "Mr. Williams, we're still trying to understand what happened. This HOA officer says your mother fell while he was investigating rule violations, but this neighbor has video that might tell a different story." Marcus looked over at Officer Hayes, who was now talking to the other police officer and pointing at Martha's house. Marcus had dealt with enough bullies and criminals to recognize one when he saw one. "I'd like to see that video," Marcus said to Mrs. Chen. Mrs. Chen showed Marcus her phone. The video clearly showed Hayes grabbing Martha's arm, preventing her from going to her door, and then pushing her backward so that she fell and hit her head. Marcus watched the video twice, his face getting more serious each time. When he was finished, he walked over to where Hayes was standing with the second police officer. "Officer Hayes," Marcus said in a calm but firm voice, "I'm Martha Williams's son. I understand you were here on HOA business." Hayes looked at Marcus and seemed to think he could intimidate him, like he had intimidated Martha. "That's right. Your mother was violating community rules and refused to cooperate." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I see. And what is your law enforcement background, Officer Hayes?" Hayes puffed out his chest. "I have full enforcement authority in this community. I don't have to explain myself to you." Marcus smiled slightly, but it was not a friendly smile. "Actually, you do. I'm a lawyer and my mother has been injured, so I need to understand exactly what authority you think you have." Hayes looked less confident now. "I work for the Willowbrook HOA. I enforce community rules." But you're not a sworn police officer, are you? Marcus asked. Hayes hesitated. I have enforcement powers. Marcus turned to Sergeant Thompson. Officer, has this man been sworn in as a police officer in this county? Sergeant Thompson looked at Hayes. Mr. Hayes, are you a certified law enforcement officer? Hayes's face was getting red. I have authority to enforce HOA rules. That's not what I asked, Sergeant Thompson said firmly. Are you a sworn law enforcement officer or not? Hayes looked down at his feet. No, but I have civil enforcement powers. Marcus nodded. So you're a private citizen who works for the HOA. You have no more legal authority than any other citizen. Hayes tried to argue. I have the right to investigate rule violations. Marcus looked at Hayes with the cold stare he had used on enemy prisoners in Afghanistan. You have the right to observe and report. You do not have the right to detain, restrain, or use physical force against anyone. Hayes was starting to look worried. The confidence he had shown when bullying Martha was disappearing fast. Marcus continued. And according to this video, you physically prevented my mother from entering her own home, grabbed her against her will, and then pushed her so hard that she fell and was injured. Sergeant Thompson had been listening to this conversation carefully. Mr. Hayes, I'm going to need to see your identification and any certification you have for this enforcement position. Hayes fumbled for his wallet and handed over his driver's license. He did not have any other identification. Marcus walked back over to check on his mother. The paramedics had stopped the bleeding and were preparing to take her to the hospital for tests. How are you feeling, Mom? Marcus asked. Martha squeezed her son's hand. Better now that you're here. Marcus, I was just trying to ask questions about HOA rules. I never caused any trouble. Marcus looked at his mother's injured head and felt anger burning in his chest, but his military and legal training had taught him to stay calm and think clearly. Mom, we're going to take care of this. Right now I want you to go to the hospital and get checked out properly. Martha started to protest. I think I'm okay now. Mom, you hit your head hard on concrete. You might have a concussion. Please go to the hospital. As the paramedics loaded Martha into the ambulance, Marcus walked back over to Sergeant Thompson. Officer, I want to file charges against Mr. Hayes for assault and battery. Hayes stepped forward angrily. You can't do that. I was doing my job. Marcus looked at Hayes calmly. Your job does not include putting your hands on people or preventing them from entering their own homes. Sergeant Thompson nodded. Mr. Williams, we'll need to get statements from everyone and review the video evidence. Marcus pulled out his business card and handed it to Sergeant Thompson. I'm an attorney specializing in civil rights cases. Here's my contact information. I'll be at the hospital with my mother, but I'll be available whenever you need me. Sergeant Thompson looked at the business card and his eyebrows went up slightly. Marcus Williams was not just any lawyer. He was well known in the city for taking on police brutality and civil rights cases. Hayes read the business card over Sergeant Thompson's shoulder and his face went pale. Marcus got in his car to follow the ambulance to the hospital, but as he drove away, he was already planning his next moves. Hayes had picked the wrong family to mess with. Martha tried once more to pull her arm free from Officer Hayes's grip. The pain was getting worse, and she could feel his fingernails digging into her skin. She had never been grabbed like this before, and fear was starting to replace her anger. Please let go of me, Martha said again, trying to keep her voice calm. You're hurting me. Hayes looked around at the neighbors who were watching and seemed to realize he had made a mistake. But instead of letting Martha go, he became even more aggressive. This is all your fault, he said in a low, angry voice. If you had just listened to me, none of this would have happened. Martha could see Mrs. Chen walking closer with her phone in her hand. Mr. Johnson was coming down from his porch too. Even the Martinez family had come outside to see what was happening. I want to go inside my house, Martha said more loudly so the neighbors could hear. I have not done anything wrong. Hayes tightened his grip on Martha's arm. You've done plenty wrong. You've broken HOA rules and now you're being difficult with a law enforcement officer. Martha felt confused. Are you a police officer? I thought you worked for the HOA. Hayes puffed out his chest again. I am an enforcement officer with full authority in this community. You will respect my authority. Martha tried to take a step toward her front door, but Hayes pulled her back roughly. The sudden movement made Martha lose her balance and she stumbled. Stop fighting me, Hayes yelled. Martha was not fighting. She was just trying to get to her own front door. But Hayes seemed to think she was attacking him somehow. Mrs. Chen was now close enough to hear everything. "Officer, maybe you should let her go inside," she said in a worried voice. Hayes turned toward Mrs. Chen with an angry look. "This is none of your business. Go back to your house." Mrs. Chen looked scared but did not move away. "I think Martha should be allowed to go inside if she wants to." "I don't care what you think," Hayes snapped. "This woman is violating HOA rules and interfering with my investigation." Martha was getting more frightened by the minute. Hayes was acting like she had committed a serious crime, but all she had done was ask questions about HOA rules. "Please," Martha said to Hayes. "I just want to call the HOA office and ask about the rules. That's all." Hayes pulled Martha closer to him. She could smell his bad breath and see sweat on his forehead. "You're not calling anyone. You're going to remove those items from your yard right now today." Martha looked toward her garden corner where Robert's bench sat under the oak tree. The wind chimes were moving gently in the breeze. She could not imagine destroying the last things that reminded her of her husband. "I need time to understand the rules first," Martha said. "And I want to see if I can get approval for my bench and wind chimes." Hayes made a disgusted sound. "There is no approval process for people like you. You follow the rules or you pay the fines. It's that simple." Martha felt her anger return. "People like me? What does that mean?" Hayes looked around at the watching neighbors and seemed to remember where he was. But his grip on Martha's arm did not loosen. "It means people who think the rules don't apply to them," he said. But Martha could hear the lie in his voice. Mrs. Chen had her phone up now and was clearly recording everything. Hayes noticed this and became furious. "Turn that phone off," he shouted at Mrs. Chen. "You cannot record a law enforcement investigation." Mrs. Chen looked scared but kept holding her phone. "I'm just standing in my own yard," she said quietly. Hayes let go of Martha's arm suddenly and took a step toward Mrs. Chen. "I said, turn that phone off." Martha used this moment to try to get to her front door. She took 3 quick steps toward her house, but Hayes saw her moving and spun around. "Where do you think you're going?" he yelled. Martha had her hand on her door handle. "I'm going inside my house to call the HOA office." Hayes rushed toward Martha and grabbed her shoulders with both hands. "You're not going anywhere." Martha tried to turn the door handle, but Hayes pulled her backward. She lost her balance and started to fall. Hayes let go of her shoulders, but it was too late. Martha fell backward onto the concrete walkway that led to her front door. She hit the ground hard, and the back of her head struck the concrete with a loud sound that made everyone watching gasp. Pain shot through Martha's head and down her back. She felt warm liquid running down her neck and realized she was bleeding. The world seemed fuzzy and far away for a moment. "Oh my God," Mrs. Chen screamed. "Martha, are you okay?" Martha tried to sit up, but her head hurt terribly and she felt dizzy. She touched the back of her head and her hand came away covered with blood. Hayes stood over Martha, looking shocked at what had happened. For a moment he seemed frozen, like he could not believe Martha was lying on the ground bleeding. Mr. Johnson came running over. "Martha, don't move! I'm calling an ambulance." Hayes seemed to wake up from his shock. "She fell," he said loudly. "She was trying to get away from me and she fell." Mrs. Chen was still recording with her phone. "She did not fall. You pushed her." Hayes pointed at Mrs. Chen angrily. "Turn that phone off right now. This is a law enforcement matter." Martha tried again to sit up. The concrete was cold and hard under her back, and she could feel more blood running down her neck. She had never been so scared and confused in her life. "Help me," Martha said weakly. "Please help me." Mrs. Chen knelt down beside Martha. "Don't try to move, honey. Help is coming." Hayes was walking back and forth looking upset. "This is not my fault. She was resisting and interfering with my investigation." Mr. Johnson finished calling 911 and came over to kneel by Martha too. "The ambulance is coming, Martha. Just stay still." Hayes walked over to the group around Martha. "Everyone needs to move back. This is a crime scene now." Mrs. Chen looked up at Hayes with anger. "The only crime here is what you did to this poor woman." Hayes pointed at Mrs. Chen again. "I told you to stop recording. Give me that phone." Mrs. Chen held her phone closer to her body. "I have the right to record what happens in my own neighborhood." Hayes took a step toward Mrs. Chen, but Mr. Johnson stood up and moved between them. "Officer, I think you should wait for the police to arrive." "I am the police here," Hayes said, but he sounded less sure than before. Martha could hear sirens in the distance getting closer. The sound made her feel a little better. Help was coming. Hayes looked around at all the neighbors who were now outside watching. The Martinez family was there, and the Johnsons and several other people Martha recognized. Everyone was staring at Hayes with angry or shocked faces. This woman was violating HOA rules, Hayes announced to the crowd. She refused to cooperate with my investigation. Mrs. Chen looked up from where she was kneeling beside Martha. All she wanted was to go inside her house. That's not a crime. The sirens were getting louder. Martha closed her eyes and tried not to think about the pain in her head. She wondered if Marcus would come to visit her today like he usually did. She hoped he would not see her like this. Martha tried once more to pull her arm free from Officer Hayes's grip. The pain was getting worse and she could feel his fingernails digging into her skin. She had never been grabbed like this before and fear was starting to replace her anger. "Please let go of me," Martha said again, trying to keep her voice calm. "You're hurting me." Hayes looked around at the neighbors who were watching and seemed to realize he had made a mistake. But instead of letting Martha go, he became even more aggressive. "This is all your fault," he said in a low, angry voice. "If you had just listened to me, none of this would have happened." Martha could see Mrs. Chen walking closer with her phone in her hand. Mr. Johnson was coming down from his porch too. Even the Martinez family had come outside to see what was happening. "I want to go inside my house," Martha said more loudly so the neighbors could hear. "I have not done anything wrong." Hayes tightened his grip on Martha's arm. "You've done plenty wrong. You've broken HOA rules and now you're being difficult with a law enforcement officer." Martha felt confused. "Are you a police officer? I thought you worked for the HOA." Hayes puffed out his chest again. "I am an enforcement officer with full authority in this community. You will respect my authority." Martha tried to take a step toward her front door, but Hayes pulled her back roughly. The sudden movement made Martha lose her balance and she stumbled. "Stop fighting me," Hayes yelled. Martha was not fighting. She was just trying to get to her own front door. But Hayes seemed to think she was attacking him somehow. Mrs. Chen was now close enough to hear everything. "Officer, maybe you should let her go inside," she said in a worried voice. Hayes turned toward Mrs. Chen with an angry look. "This is none of your business. Go back to your house." Mrs. Chen looked scared but did not move away. "I think Martha should be allowed to go inside if she wants to." "I don't care what you think," Hayes snapped. "This woman is violating HOA rules and interfering with my investigation." Martha was getting more frightened by the minute. Hayes was acting like she had committed a serious crime. But all she had done was ask questions about HOA rules. "Please," Martha said to Hayes. "I just want to call the HOA office and ask about the rules. That's all." Hayes pulled Martha closer to him. She could smell his bad breath and see sweat on his forehead. "You're not calling anyone. You're going to remove those items from your yard right now today." Martha looked toward her garden corner where Robert's bench sat under the oak tree. The wind chimes were moving gently in the breeze. She could not imagine destroying the last things that reminded her of her husband. "I need time to understand the rules first," Martha said. "And I want to see if I can get approval for my bench and wind chimes." Hayes made a disgusted sound. "There is no approval process for people like you. You follow the rules or you pay the fines. It's that simple." Martha felt her anger return. "People like me? What does that mean?" Hayes looked around at the watching neighbors and seemed to remember where he was. But his grip on Martha's arm did not loosen. "It means people who think the rules don't apply to them," he said, but Martha could hear the lie in his voice. Mrs. Chen had her phone up now and was clearly recording everything. Hayes noticed this and became furious. "Turn that phone off," he shouted at Mrs. Chen. "You cannot record a law enforcement investigation." Mrs. Chen looked scared but kept holding her phone. "I'm just standing in my own yard," she said quietly. Hayes let go of Martha's arm suddenly and took a step toward Mrs. Chen. "I said turn that phone off." Martha used this moment to try to get to her front door. She took 3 quick steps toward her house, but Hayes saw her moving and spun around. "Where do you think you're going?" he yelled. Martha had her hand on her door handle. "I'm going inside my house to call the HOA office." Hayes rushed toward Martha and grabbed her shoulders with both hands. "You're not going anywhere." Martha tried to turn the door handle, but Hayes pulled her backward. She lost her balance and started to fall. Hayes let go of her shoulders, but it was too late. Martha fell backward onto the concrete walkway that led to her front door. She hit the ground hard and the back of her head struck the concrete with a loud sound that made everyone watching gasp. Pain shot through Martha's head and down her back. She felt warm liquid running down her neck and realized she was bleeding. The world seemed fuzzy and far away for a moment. "Oh my God," Mrs. Chen screamed. "Martha, are you okay?" Martha tried to sit up, but her head hurt terribly and she felt dizzy. She touched the back of her head and her hand came away covered with blood. Hayes stood over Martha, looking shocked at what had happened. For a moment he seemed frozen, like he could not believe Martha was lying on the ground bleeding. Mr. Johnson came running over. "Martha, don't move! I'm calling an ambulance!" Hayes seemed to wake up from his shock. "She fell," he said loudly. "She was trying to get away from me and she fell." Mrs. Chen was still recording with her phone. "She did not fall. You pushed her." Hayes pointed at Mrs. Chen angrily. "Turn that phone off right now. This is a law enforcement matter." Martha tried again to sit up. The concrete was cold and hard under her back, and she could feel more blood running down her neck. She had never been so scared and confused in her life. "Help me," Martha said weakly. "Please help me." Mrs. Chen knelt down beside Martha. "Don't try to move, honey. Help is coming." Hayes was walking back and forth, looking upset. "This is not my fault. She was resisting and interfering with my investigation." Mr. Johnson finished calling 911 and came over to kneel by Martha too. "The ambulance is coming, Martha. Just stay still." Hayes walked over to the group around Martha. "Everyone needs to move back. This is a crime scene now." Mrs. Chen looked up at Hayes with anger. "The only crime here is what you did to this poor woman." Hayes pointed at Mrs. Chen again. "I told you to stop recording." "Give me that phone." Mrs. Chen held her phone closer to her body. "I have the right to record what happens in my own neighborhood." Hayes took a step toward Mrs. Chen, but Mr. Johnson stood up and moved between them. "Officer, I think you should wait for the police to arrive." "I am the police here," Hayes said, but he sounded less sure than before. Martha could hear sirens in the distance getting closer. The sound made her feel a little better. Help was coming. Hayes looked around at all the neighbors who were now outside watching. The Martinez family was there, and the Johnsons and several other people Martha recognized. Everyone was staring at Hayes with angry or shocked faces. "This woman was violating HOA rules," Hayes announced to the crowd. "She refused to cooperate with my investigation." Mrs. Chen looked up from where she was kneeling beside Martha. All she wanted was to go inside her house. "That's not a crime." The sirens were getting louder. Martha closed her eyes and tried not to think about the pain in her head. She wondered if Marcus would come to visit her today like he usually did. She hoped he would not see her like this. Martha Williams walked slowly through her front yard, carrying a small watering can. The morning sun felt warm on her face. She was 65 years old and had lived in this house for 15 years. Every morning she came out to water her flowers and check on her garden. The neighborhood was called Willowbrook. It was a nice place with big houses and neat lawns. All the houses looked similar, with white fences and small front gardens. Martha liked living here. It was quiet and safe. Her neighbors were mostly friendly people who waved hello when they saw her. Martha stopped next to her favorite part of the garden. There was a small wooden bench under an old oak tree. Her husband Robert had built this bench with his own hands 20 years ago. He died 3 years ago, but the bench reminded her of him every day. She sat on it when she missed him too much. Next to the bench were 3 small wind chimes. They made soft music when the wind blew through them. Martha loved the gentle sounds they made. One chime was blue, one was silver, and one was made of bamboo. Robert had bought her the blue one for their wedding anniversary. She bought the other 2 after he died because the sounds made her feel less alone. Martha finished watering her roses and walked back toward her house. She looked at her garden with pride. Everything was neat and clean. Her grass was green and cut short. Her flowers were healthy and colorful. She worked hard to keep everything looking nice. Mrs. Chen lived in the house next door. She was watering her own flowers and waved at Martha. "Good morning, Martha. Your garden looks beautiful today." Martha smiled and waved back. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. How is your family doing?" "Everyone is good. My grandson is visiting this week. He loves playing in the backyard." Martha nodded. She missed having children around. She and Robert never had kids, but she enjoyed seeing the neighborhood children play and grow up. As Martha walked toward her front door, she noticed a white truck parked across the street. The truck had words painted on the side that said Willowbrook HOA Enforcement. She had never seen this truck before. HOA meant Homeowners Association. It was the group that made rules for the neighborhood. Martha knew about the HOA, but they had never bothered her before. She paid her monthly fees on time. She kept her house and yard looking nice. She followed all the rules she knew about. Her grass was not too long. Her house was painted the right color. She never played loud music or had wild parties. A man got out of the white truck. He was tall and had short brown hair. He wore a dark blue uniform that looked like a police uniform. There was a badge on his shirt and a belt with tools hanging from it. He looked around the neighborhood like he was searching for something. Martha went inside her house and made herself a cup of tea. She sat by her kitchen window and watched the man in uniform. He was walking slowly down the street, looking at each house carefully. He had a clipboard in his hand and was writing things down. The man stopped in front of the Johnson house. The Johnsons had lived there for 10 years. They were a young family with 2 small children. The man looked at their front yard and wrote something on his clipboard. Then he took pictures with his phone. Martha wondered what he was doing. The Johnson house looked fine to her. Their grass was green and their flowers were pretty. Their car was parked in the driveway like always. She could not see anything wrong. The man in uniform continued walking down the street. He stopped at 3 more houses and took more pictures. Each time he wrote something on his clipboard. Martha started to feel worried. What was he looking for? Why was he taking pictures of her neighbors' houses? Martha had heard some neighbors talking about changes in the HOA. A few months ago, new people had been elected to the HOA board. These new board members said they wanted to make the neighborhood even better. They wanted everyone to follow the rules more carefully. Some neighbors liked this idea. They said it would help keep house values high. Other neighbors were not happy. They said the new rules were too strict and cost too much money to follow. Martha had not paid much attention to these conversations. She thought her house and yard already looked good. She never imagined the new rules would affect her. She was a quiet person who did not cause trouble for anyone. The man in uniform was getting closer to Martha's house. He stopped in front of the Martinez family's home. The Martinez family had lived there for 8 years. Mr. Martinez worked at the hospital and Mrs. Martinez taught at the elementary school. They had painted their front door bright red last month. The uniformed man took several pictures of the red door. He wrote something on his clipboard and shook his head like he was not happy. Martha wondered if there was a rule about door colors. Her own door was white, which seemed safe. After 20 minutes, the man in uniform reached Martha's house. He stood at the end of her driveway and looked at her yard carefully. Martha watched him from her kitchen window. Her heart started beating faster. The man walked slowly around her front yard. He looked at her flowers, her grass, and her mailbox. Everything seemed normal to Martha. Then the man walked over to her special corner with the bench and wind chimes. He stopped and stared at the bench for a long time. He took pictures from different angles. Then he looked up at the wind chimes hanging from the tree branch. He took more pictures of them too. Martha could see him shaking his head and writing things on his clipboard. Martha felt confused and worried. What was wrong with her bench and wind chimes? They had been there for years. No one had ever complained about them before. The bench was small and simple. The wind chimes were quiet and pretty. They did not hurt anyone or cause any problems. The man in uniform walked back to his truck and got inside. He sat there for a few minutes, looking at his clipboard and writing more notes. Then he drove away. Martha stayed by her window for another 10 minutes thinking about what she had seen. She hoped the man was just doing some kind of survey and would not come back. But something in her stomach told her this was not the end. Something told her that her quiet, peaceful life in Willowbrook was about to change. She looked out at her garden one more time. The wind chimes were moving gently in the breeze, making their soft music. The bench sat empty under the oak tree, waiting for her to come and remember Robert. Everything looked the same as always, but somehow Martha knew that tomorrow might be very different.